So they're quick solutions, like duct tape is a heuristic. It's a good solution, quick solution, but it's not always the correct solution. So when we as humans are confronted with all this information that surrounds us, we don't have the capability like computers do to use algorithms, to go step by step through all kinds of possible combinations. So we more often rely on heuristics, which ends up producing biases for us. I was a psychology major in college. I went to Mercyhurst University, graduated from there in 1985, and then came up to Western New York to Geneseo. Back in the mid-'80s, they had a master's degree in general experimental psychology. So my background is psychology. So I think actually back when the title came about, it kind of it's an umbrella term that takes care of liberal arts, humanities, speech, English, psychology, social sciences, fine arts. So I think it's kind of a fancy term that we use for the liberal arts programs that we have here at the college. So it's a little unusual. I think some people think of it, they're very impressed when I use the term Dean of Human Communications and Behavior. It sounds really official, but it does basically boil down to the liberal arts and sciences. So,
what drew you to human behavior and communication?
Oh, well, it's really a kind of an interesting story, because when I was in high school, if you would have asked me what I wanted to be when I grew up, I would have said an English teacher. But what happened was, when I started taking classes at Mercyhurst, I fell in love with everything I was taking. I fell in love with the history. I fell in love with the science and the arts. And then I took psychology, and psychology seemed to wrap all of those things up together in a nice package with a bow. So I said, this is perfect. This is a perfect major for me, because I can explore all those things that I'm very, very interested in one topic. And that's really what it's been like for me.
Students that are, starting school or in middle school, considering what they should study, what would be your recommendation, and kind of what would be your sales pitch to them? My sales pitch would be our general studies program, because it does not necessarily pigeonhole you into anything in particular. So it's a great general degree for students to get, because you explore all of those topics. Basically, what I did when I was in school is I did not declare a major until my junior year. So I was taking all the general courses, and then finally I did settle on psych my junior year. So that's essentially the same thing as our general studies degree here. General studies, liberal arts and sciences, associate in science. Do you think there's something about human behavior psychology that would particularly benefit students?
I think it would benefit anybody. When I was teaching intro psych, I would often have accounting majors say, well, why do I need to take this class? Why do I need to take general psych? And I said, well, are you a human being? And they'd say, yeah. Well, think of this course sort of like an owner's manual for you, for your mind, for your interactions with other people, for your dealings in the workplace. It's a very, very critical subject to study.
Yeah, I mentioned in our email what I've studied over the last few years in human behavior. And for me, it's been something where I wish I'd done this years ago. Mm-hmm. It's changed the way I approached my job, especially as a journalist, and what kind of questions I think to ask, how I ask them, how I approach people, how I negotiate with people for interviews. I mean, a whole slew of things that really impacts what I do. And I'm like, wow, I probably could have been a much better journalist in my 20s if I knew some of the stuff I knew today. Do you think that this is a topic that can benefit people throughout a range of life experiences?
Absolutely, absolutely. I know even in my interactions in this new administrative position, it really helps me to have the people skills that you learn in psychology, in the science of human behavior. So you'll learn a lot about how to interact with people. My training at Geneseo was really kind of unusual. I knew I wanted to become a teacher, but I actually was doing some study of counseling, school counseling. Back in that day in the 80s, there wasn't a school counseling master's degree. So what's really refreshing about this particular position for me is I get to use some of my people skills that I initially developed when I was back in graduate school. So it's not just straight teaching.
Well, I mentioned this earlier. I'm become fascinated with heuristics and cognitive bias. First of all, for our audience, maybe explain what those terms mean.
So heuristics and cognitive biases have their roots in the work of cognitive psychology, which is a branch of psychology. There are lots of different subtypes of psychology. I think back after the behaviorist revolution in psychology, people were looking for some way to tie into higher mental processes. And so there were a lot of theorists back then that used models from computer science to develop what we now know as cognitive psychology. And one of the areas of research has to do with problem solving. And basically, cognitive psychologists tell us that we have two main methods for solving problems. We can rely on algorithms, which are very systematic, step-by-step solutions to problems, or we can use heuristics, those rules of thumb, those quick and dirty things that our parents teach us when we're working on cars or cooking. Should we measure out a cup of sugar? No, that's about a cup. Righty-tighty, lefty-loosey, those kinds of things. Those are heuristics. So they do generate quick solutions to problems, but they're not always the correct solutions. So I always tell my classes, righty-tighty, lefty-loosey works in most instances. Not in all, not when you're doing plumbing, because if you turn righty-tighty, you may get sprayed with water in your face. So they're quick solutions, like duct tape is a heuristic. It's a good solution, quick solution, but it's not always the correct solution. So when we as humans are confronted with all this information that surrounds us, we don't have the capability like computers do to use algorithms, to go step by step through all kinds of possible combinations. So we more often rely on heuristics, which ends up producing biases for us. So cognitive biases are things like the confirmation bias, this tendency that we have to actually look for information that confirms preconceptions that we have and ignore things that don't fit with our preconceptions. So the way it was phrased in the literature is, in cognitive psychology, is we're very lazy in terms of processing information because we don't have that capacity to use algorithms all the time. So a lot of biases out there. There's a lot of also heuristics that lead to biases, like the availability heuristic. We're more likely to think of things that readily come to mind for us. So it's a very interesting area of research.
Delving a little bit deeper. So first of all, one of the things, as a layperson looking at this, I kind of come to the thought that heuristics and biases are really two sides of the same coin.
Yes.
That a lot of times the things that lead to biases are based in heuristics, which are based in survival skills.
Exactly.
But they don't always adapt well to every situation we
right.
find ourselves in.
That's kind of what we run into on a daily basis. Probably many of what we used to call Freudian slips could possibly be due to cognitive biases or heuristics, as you mentioned. So,
along those lines, then, over hundreds of thousands of human evolution, we use heuristics to solve problems that were much simpler than what we face in a complex society today, and that leads to, I think, a lot of problems for people.
Absolutely. I totally agree. Heuristics worked fine for our grandparents, our great-grandparents, even before that, but we are confronted with so much information, it's really difficult to keep track of everything. And one interesting area of research that I came across is the difference between experts and novices. And novices they're dedicated to trying to use algorithms. So get that image of that greenhorn that's just jumping right in and trying to solve a problem systematically. Experts, on the other hand, we know typically will use heuristics to kind of limit the possibilities, then try to use algorithms to get the proper solution. So that seems to be the line that researchers are looking at now, the differences between experts and novices and their problem-solving strategies.
Going back to maybe how people, even whether they're entering a course of study or those of us later in life, understanding biases, do you think that is something helpful for people to try to do? And two, do you think people can really learn to check their biases and move beyond that heuristic thinking that gets them into trouble? Well,
to deal with the second part of it, I think a very important first step is knowing what the biases are and knowing that we typically fall into those cognitive processing traps. So I do think that's the beauty of a liberal arts education. We learn about those biases. We learn about the differences between people. We learn about different cultures. That sets us up to better process in a more accurate fashion, if you will.
You mentioned confirmation bias earlier. That, to me, and I've seen some information that's like one of the hardest biases for us to overcome.
Absolutely. It really is, because we do look for that affirmation in our environment to know that we are right about something, or try to confirm that we're right about something. So it is really difficult. It's very, very difficult. One of the things that I've always liked to study is the philosophy of science. And I always tell students, if you think about the way we do science, we can never really prove anything, because we'd have to test things into infinity to prove something. But it only takes one instance to disconfirm something.
So you're talking about falsification?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep. Popper.
Karl Popper?
Yep.
Yeah. We could get off on a whole thing about Karl Popper and tolerant society, but maybe we'll come back to that. One of the things I mentioned I wanted to talk about when we start talking about biases is in algorithms, really, because the computer scientists have figured out algorithms and how to use those to manipulate our biases, to make us check our social media more often, to look at certain information, to feed us information that confirms our confirmation biases. And so I'm just wondering your thoughts on that, and how much of a problem is that for society?
Oh, I do think it is a problem. I would never necessarily consider myself to be an expert in social media. I think we've mentioned that. I'm not on Facebook, I'm not on Twitter. But I do think it's very fascinating when you broach the subject with me in our initial conversations, that we tend to operate on those heuristics, but computer systems are using algorithms. So it is kind of this interesting confluence of research and concepts that I started looking at, and psychologists started looking at in the late 50s and the 60s as well. So, but I do think, it can be a problem. And going back to your earlier point, the more we know about the biases, the more we're informed about those biases, hopefully we can combat some of the information we're getting.
In your field of communications, I'm gathering that has an overlap with human behavior. Do you look at all about media and how we consume media and how media feeds stuff to us?
I don't personally have any background in that, but we certainly have a lot of people, a lot of my faculty members would be better able to speak to that. So,
okay. Are there other areas, topics that we haven't gotten into that you think people can benefit from if they understood it better, help them in their business lives or whatever else they're doing?
There's a lot of work out there now on positive psychology that evolved from the work of early behaviorists who tended to view people in very straightforward stimulus response forms. Martin Seligman talks a lot about empowering people and helping them become more positive, enriching their lives. So he's a very interesting author to read, especially considering the early work that he did on learned helplessness. So I think kind of completely transformed that message. So we can take our negative experiences, learn from them, and become more positive individuals. I think that's very helpful.
So tell us about social media degree program.
It's a very interesting program that we have. We have faculty from the business area that are actually teaching courses in that, and folks from my area in the communications side of the house. So it's a very unique kind of experience for students.
What do you think students would come away with in that? Is that preparing them for a career, or is that preparing them for navigating our world today?
I think the orientation is more career, but certainly a student taking a course in that would be a more informed consumer of social media information. So it can benefit both, from both avenues, from the career standpoint, from a personal standpoint as well.
You mentioned you're not on social media, but has it changed how, the learning environment?
Oh, I think it totally has. Students are on it, and I know a lot of faculty members will actually post Facebook pages that are devoted to instruction. It's a good way to reach out to students. I know, even though I don't use Twitter, I use Remind in some instances to let students know class updates. But I think it certainly has. And I know more and more faculty members are trying to integrate that kind of technology with the experiences that they're producing in the classroom. I think we've reached a point where we're tired of telling students to put their phones away. It's more constructive to have them pull them out and look something up right there on the spot. So that certainly has changed things.
Put you on the spot a little bit. Mm-hmm. You not being on social media, does that put you at a disadvantage in dealing with students?
I don't think my interactions with students at this point now as dean are front and center as they were when I was a teacher. I think a lot of my responsibilities are more old school, brick and mortar kinds of things. So I could see where not being on social media might impact me if I were still in the classroom. But I have had colleagues point things out to me on Facebook that I found very informative about things that were going on here at the college.
What's the recommendation to your faculty regarding their use of social media?
I would recommend that faculty try to get on board. It's good to be in touch with students using social media and using those platforms to get information out to students.
So here's the next question.
Mm-hmm.
That grandchild that you have now, guess what?
Yeah.
They're going to be posting photos of you're a grandkid. And
absolutely.
So your kids maybe pulling in.
Oh yeah.
Well, I would say for me, I hate Facebook,
Mm-hmm.
but I have to be on it because that's where my high school friends are.
Yes.
That's where my family is. And our family has stayed in much better communication than we did for the prior 20 years.
Really?
Yeah.
And I would agree with that. Go ahead.
It might be interesting maybe to ask why you're not.
That's a
What
good
is
question.
your resistance?
I'm in the witness protection program. Oh no, I wasn't supposed to say that.
So let me
I
ask,
have to move now.
so why aren't you on social media?
I really don't have the time. After long days here, I go home, sit back, and fall asleep. And I know the amount of time that my kids spend on it. I know the amount of time students spend on it. It's just better. I would say that, going back to Donna Ray's point, my wife got on Facebook because we knew there would be pictures of my grandson posted. So it's always great. She'll flip her tablet over and say, hey. And it's also been great because my cousins, distant cousins from Pennsylvania where I grew up, are connected with my wife. So I get updates on them as well. So
you can get it through your wife.
I can get it through my wife.
As long as we're on the topic of the internet, something I'm really into, I'm just wondering if you've discovered podcasts yet.
Oh, absolutely. Okay, I'm not that old school. I'm not that. Absolutely. I remember, it was such a struggle early on with podcasts, but I absolutely love them. Considering the amount of driving I used to do, at one point I was teaching at 2 of our campus centers a week. So I was driving down to Arcade and driving back here. So definitely podcasts.
Any you recommend?
I absolutely love Radio Lab. I think the Hidden Brain podcast is very good, but often I'll Wait, Don't Tell Me. I'll listen to that if you can really consider that to be a podcast.
Mm-hmm.
So, but definitely Hidden Brain I think is great because it bridges the human behavior pieces that we were talking about earlier. So,
one of the things that led me to the behavior side of everything we've been talking about was I decided to study economics, which led me to Richard Thaler, which led me to Daniel Kahneman and all that. But there's, on the economic side, behavioral stuff, Freakonomics Radio,
yes,
Planet Money, all are rooted in that behavioral. So I was just wondering if you clued into that side of the behavioral issue, because it does there's a lot of stuff that overlaps with economics.
Yes. And it's very interesting because we had a search for an economics instructor a couple of years ago, and when I had filled out the paperwork, because economics was housed under social sciences, and I was the director of social sciences, looked at the concentrations and the majors students were in that were taking economics. It was pretty much business. And so the administration decided to shift that position over to the other side of the house, the math, science, and career education side. And everybody kept saying, oh, well, economics seems like it fits more with business anyway. And I said, no, there's a lot of metrics that are involved. There's a lot of social scientific data involved. But if that connection to business is more critical for our economics teacher, then it's better that she's housed on that particular side of the house. So,
to me, one of the things I learned is that there are really 2 fundamental areas of knowledge in life that help you in life, and that is economics. Everything is economics.
Absolutely.
And everything is human behavior.
Yes.
And that's why those 2 topics overlap so much.
Yes, absolutely. There is definitely a lot of overlap. That's why I love listening to Freakonomics as well. It's really very fascinating because I've never really considered myself a numbers guy, but when you consider all of the variables that are involved in a science like economics, it does dovetail very nicely with psychology and the study of human behavior.
And which brings me back to, I think this is how companies like Facebook got into behavioral sciences because they're looking at it from an economic perspective.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And I think what's very interesting for me is I recognized that connection early on, even in my undergraduate career. I had some elective credits, so I decided to take a marketing class. And I thought, wow, this is so cool. This is applied psychology, really. We're trying to figure out how people think. We're trying to influence that. And at one point, I thought about shifting over to marketing. But I wouldn't be here now if I had done that. So.